All right, today we're going to be talking about the critique of Berkeley and Hume. Critique of what? Well, really of a variety of ordinary concepts. Concepts that realists assume, but concepts that empiricists before them had taken for granted as well. So these are things that are largely common heritage, you might say, of people from Plato and Aristotle all the way up through Descartes and Locke. So both classical empiricists, classical rationalists up to this point have tended to adopt these assumptions. They are moreover part of common sense, I think. Both Hume and Berkeley think of themselves as defending common sense, but as we'll see, they come to some really radically non-commonsensical conclusions. And so it's part of not only the philosophical heritage, but you might say just our ordinary common sense baggage that we carry around with us that is being discarded here. Let's start with Berkeley. Berkeley was born in 1685, lived until 1753. So he comes a few years after Descartes and overlaps somewhat with Locke, though he's somewhat younger. Anyway, he develops, really for the first time in Western philosophy, a fully developed system of idealism. Up to this point, there had been idealistic traditions in India for millennia. There had been some idealistic traditions in China, though they were never the majority as they were in India. But in Western philosophy, idealism was really missing from the scene until Berkeley came along. Idealism, remember, is the view that everything is mind-dependent, that the world is in some sense a construction or projection of the mind. And he argues that that is actually the best defense of common sense against skeptical arguments. And I can, in a way, sketch the general idea very, very quickly and simply. The thought is, if you're a skeptic, that the appearances that are presented to us are really different from the reality, or at least that they might be. We have no way of justifying our faith in the appearances as reflecting the way the world really is. We see things a certain way, but the argument for illusion tells us that what we see might be mistaken. The argument for dreaming says, well, how do we know that any of this that we're experiencing is actually real? Maybe it's all a dream. Maybe we're just brains in a vat. Maybe we're victims of an evil deceiver who is confusing us, not only about our perceptions, but about logic, about mathematics, about everything else that we think. And so the skeptical challenges are strong and basically try to split, you might say, appearance from reality. Berkeley says, I've got a solution. There's no distinction. The appearance is the reality. And if you assume that, the appearance is mind-dependent, so reality ends up being mind-dependent, but you've no longer got a gap. There's no longer a place for the skeptic to drive a wedge between appearance and reality, because they're just the same thing. So, he's going to argue that the best way to defend common sense and claims of knowledge against the skeptic is really to adopt that assumption from the beginning. Say there is no split between appearance and reality. There are just appearances. That's all reality is. Objects, as we understand them, are really just series of perceptions. And one can refine this view. A variety of people in the tradition do refine this and make it more and more sophisticated. But in a sense, that's the key move, to say skeptical arguments force us to reject this distinction between appearance and reality, between my representation of things and the things in themselves. And instead to say the representations, that's all they are. In fact, talk of representations here is a mistake, because that implies that it's a presentation of something else. But don't make that assumption. Instead, just take the appearances, these objects of the mind, as the things themselves. There's no way for the skeptic to get a hold. So, he's going to argue, for a variety of reasons, that a number of traditional philosophical concepts and philosophical distinctions don't make any sense. Descartes' idea of objects, Locke's idea of objects, those make no sense whatever, according to Berkeley. He's going to argue that our common sense idea of objects is going to make no sense. And so he attacks the idea of a primary quality, something that would be in the object independently of our states of mind with respect to it. There can't be any such thing. There's no such thing as equality in the object as opposed to merely in the appearance of the object, because actually appearance and the object are the same thing. So we can't distinguish primary from secondary qualities. Similarly, if everything is really a matter of ideas in the mind, what can an object be? It can just be a sequence of ideas. There's nothing else for it to be. So, let's look first at this distinction between primary and secondary qualities. The idea here is supposed to be that some properties of an object are in the object itself, whereas other properties of the object are really generated by the object's effect on our conceptual and perceptual faculties. So, for example, the shape of the chair is something that is a primary quality of it, according to Descartes and Locke. It's something that the chair really has. It really does have that shape. That's a mathematical property of it, a property that can be described in terms of physics. And so things like position, motion, extension or size, mass, those are things that are really in the objects themselves. On the other hand, things like color, texture, beauty, etc., all of those are secondary qualities according to Descartes and Locke. They're things that are generated by the interaction between us and the object. So is the brown really in the chair? The argument is no. The brown is something that is generated by some primary quality of the chair and is a matter of the way it affects us. But the way I perceive color could be different from the way you perceive color. Almost surely is different from the way that a dog or a cat or a raccoon or a worm perceives color, if they do at all. And that's something that is purely a matter of effects on my perceptual system. It's not a question of what's in the object itself. But now, here's the problem. Berkeley says, we have no basis for thinking that anything about our ideas corresponds to some mind-independent reality. I've got various things before the mind, and here it's helpful to think back to Descartes and Locke and the new way of ideas that they were promulgating. What is an idea? It's whatever is before the mind when one thinks. And so whatever your thinking is directed toward, that's an idea. Well, they say that represents an object. So it's as if I am in my mind entertaining certain representations, certain ideas, and those are meant to represent things outside of my mind. Now, some of those things, like the primary qualities of things, are there in the idea and they're really in the object. But some of these things are being supplied by my mind itself, and so color, texture, things like that. Those are things that I'm contributing, they're not directly in the object. But notice, to draw the distinction, I have to connect what's going on in my mind to what's going on outside my mind in reality. And Berkeley says, how can I do that? All I've got are the things before my mind. So in effect, all I'm looking at are ideas. I have no way of getting outside my own head and telling where my ideas correspond to a mind-independent reality, where they correspond to the things in themselves, and when they're really generating something different. You can imagine someone, or maybe, imagine me stepping outside my own mind and saying, I represent these chairs as striped and brown and dark gray. But now, let me step outside my mind and see what the chairs are really like. Now you have to imagine this spooky Dan Bobback climbing out of his body, climbing away from his perceptual system, and somehow coming into contact with reality itself, right? Somehow I directly intuit the chair, and I think, yes, the extension, the mass that's really in the chair, but the color, no color. And how can I do that, right? I have to get outside my own mind, but I have nothing but my own mind to understand the world with, so there's no way to do it. So in short, Berkeley's saying, we can't judge the resemblance between our ideas and the reality that they're supposedly representing. There is no way to tell that perceptions of width and height and so on are really corresponding to the things themselves, while other things aren't. In fact, he has a series of arguments to say perceptions of those things anyway vary while the objects remain unchanged, at least on that common-sensey picture which Descartes and Locke and Plato and Aristotle and really all philosophers in the West up to Berkeley share. The idea is that things really do have a certain height. They really have a certain width. But Berkeley says, wait a minute. How big it appears depends on how far away I am. For example, the chalkboard. Is it big or is it small? If I'm in the back row here, it looks small. But if I walk right up to it, it looks big, okay? What about a fly? Okay, a fly looks very small. Especially if I'm way across the room, it looks tiny. But if I get up closer to the fly, it looks somewhat larger. If I put it under a microscope, it looks really large. And yet, gosh, those are perceptions of size. What do you mean when you say my perception of size matches the size of the thing itself? My perception varies all the time, but presumably the fly isn't shrinking as it goes away from me and then growing big as it gets under my microscope, any more than the blackboard is very small when I'm back there, but actually grows in size when I approach. So he says, look, there is no such thing as a stable perception of size, a stable perception of weight, and so on. Something might feel heavy if you've been holding something light and then you pick up something heavier. But if you've been holding something heavier than that, why, it then feels light. It's part of the reason why in the gym I try to push myself to occasionally do at least a few reps at a higher weight, right? You've been doing this much on curls, let's say, and it feels heavy to you. And then you pick up a bigger dumbbell, you do a few reps with that, and then those feel easy, right? That's why I mean, it's partly because I idealize Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it's partly because I sort of think, yeah, it makes it feel so much easier. And so that's something where the perception of weight is something that varies a lot. And it's something you might have experienced in ordinary life. You're tired, man, the thing you have to take out, let's say the garbage you have to take out feels heavy, but if you're sort of bright and fresh first thing in the morning, it doesn't feel heavy. Or you've been doing the bench press at a certain weight, you're used to it, it feels light. But then you go up in a few pounds and it feels heavy again. But then after doing that a while, it feels lighter and lighter. Then you go back to the weight you had done before that used to feel kind of heavy, and now it feels easy. So those things keep varying. Our perceptions, our tactile perceptions, our visual perceptions, sound. I mean, if you've been in a really loud place, then you come into a sort of normal place and everything seems quiet to you, right? Your perception of how loud something is varies. And so all of that varies while presumably the objects remain unchanged. That tells us that there can't be a sort of match between our perceptions of these primary qualities and the qualities themselves, or so Berkeley argues. He has a dialogue between Hylas and Philonous, where Hylas is basically the defender of common sense, the defender of the Cartesian, the Lockean view, and Philonous is something like the skeptic. I think he's referring here to Philo of Alexandria in part, thinking of the skeptic who is trying to show that none of this makes any sense. So he says, well, from what you've laid down, it follows that both the extension by you perceived and that perceived by the mite, itself a tiny insect, as likewise all those perceived by lesser animals reach to them the true extension of a mite's foot, that is to say, by your own principles you're led to an absurdity. So he's asking you to imagine this. Imagine that you are a tiny mite, okay, a dust mite, this tiny microscopic little bug, if you will think that way. You're going to perceive certain things as really big, that you and I, being human beings, are going to perceive as really, really small. For example, look at this. Those are dust mites on carpet. Okay, and that's the way carpeting looks to a dust mite. It looks like a huge pile of big, fat spaghetti. Okay? Now, that's not the way carpeting, I mean, gosh, I'm probably walking on killing dust mites right now as we speak. This is making me feel terribly guilty. Because it's like, oh, look at the spaghetti, squish! Oh. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it's disturbing by the way, look at that. But that's a dust mite's view of the carpet. It's very different from our view. Those strands in the carpeting look tiny to us, but look pretty big to the dust mite. The little bump seems very small to us. It seems like it's a very smooth carpet, but it looks like hills and valleys to the dust mite. Or look at this. Those are mites on human skin. Oh, yeah. I mean, my skin looks smooth and nice to me, but if you keep going closer and closer, it looks like all right. Anyway, sorry to disgust you, but you'll remember it. Anyway, yeah, so primary qualities are ones that are supposed to be stable, really, in the object. But now, are the strands in the carpeting or the texture of the carpeting, are those things big or small variations? Looks big to the dust mite, looks small to us. What about the skin? It looks smooth to us, but it doesn't look smooth at all to the dust mite. It looks as if there are big hills and valleys in it, and it doesn't to us. So what is the nature of the object itself? Philonous says as we approach or recede from an object, the visible extension varies, being at one distance 10 or 100 times greater than another. Doth it not therefore follow from hence likewise that it is not really inherent in the object? How big am I? Well, if I get closer to you, I look larger. If I'm far away, I look smaller. Here I can do it for the video by approaching the camera. I look bigger and bigger. And then I can back away, and I look smaller and smaller. And what size am I really? Well, according to the common sense view, the Cartesian view, the Lockean view, I've got one size, okay? And it's supposed to match my perception of it. But what do you mean, my perception of it? My perception of it when it's up close, when it's far away, the perception of a dust mite, the perception of a giant, and so on. All of that seems to vary in a way that the quality of the object is not really supposed to vary. Here's an example that's not so disgusting as the perspective of the dust mite. Here we are approaching Shiprock at a distance in northwestern New Mexico. Here it looks far away, it looks small. But as we approach Shiprock, it looks bigger and bigger. And finally we get up close, and it looks very large. Here's another analogy. When I was in graduate school, I was a teaching assistant for a professor who was the chair of the department at the time, and he was also the chair of the faculty senate, and was a very busy guy. And sometimes I had to fill in for him, but sometimes he really was, to be frank, not prepared for class. And he was reading, he sailed. He had a sailboat that he took out on Lake Erie. And at the time he was reading this book by Joshua Slocum about circumnavigating the world alone. He was the first person to do that. And so he was reading this book, and if he was not prepared to teach logic, he would just come in and tell us stories of Slocum at Tierra del Fuego, or Slocum as he encounters, these islanders in the Pacific and so on. And as the term went on, he got the idea that he should do this with his own little sailboat, that he should take it out of Lake Erie, put it in the Ohio River, go all the way down to the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico, then go down through the Panama Canal and circumnavigate the globe alone himself. Okay? Well, one of the people in the philosophy department said, yeah, how are you going to do this? I don't understand. Okay, I see how you stay close to the coastline and you manage to get all the way to the Panama Canal. But now you've got the Pacific Ocean, right? You can't just go up the coast of California or something. You've got to sail in the middle of nowhere. How are you ever going to find why? And here was his answer. Oh, it's very easy. I'll just bring a little transistor AM radio. And at some point, I'll be able to pick up a Honolulu rock and roll station. And I'll just sail so it gets louder and louder. Okay, well, shortly after that, he had a mental breakdown. But, there is something like the radio station is producing whatever it's producing there in Honolulu. But his idea was, well, how loud it is varies with how close you are. You're right there close to the station in Honolulu, it's broadcasting loudly. You're out there in the middle of the Pacific, you might be able to pick it up, but it's very remote, very scratchy. And his idea, in a way, was, well, you can make it get louder and louder. The thing itself doesn't change, right? The volume doesn't change, but in a certain sense, your perception of it does change as you approach. So sound works very similarly, in a sense, to vision and other types of things. Well, what does Philonous conclude from all this? That these primary qualities are not in the objects themselves. He says, isn't it the very same reasoning to conclude there is no extension or figure in an object, because to one eye it seems little, smooth and round, while at the same time it appears to the other great, uneven, and irregular? Well, they're the same. In other words, the same way in which our perceptions of color might vary, and our perceptions of texture or beauty or goodness might vary. Looks like these things vary too. Does that ever happen? You may at any time make the experiment. Look through one eye bare and with the other through a microscope. And you'll see that the thing looks very different through a microscope from the way it does in ordinary life. And so the microscope is a way of getting up super close to the object, you might think. And of course it looks very, very different. Well, that's the key to Berkeley's argument against the distinction between primary and secondary qualities. The key idea of the argument is really that our perceptions of primary qualities vary just as much as our perceptions of secondary qualities. But I think the underlying thought is that really, as soon as I get into this question of what is really in the object itself and what is in my mind, I presuppose a standpoint where somehow I can be outside and compare my mental representation to the object itself. But there is no such place to stand. There's nowhere where I can compare the representation I have in my mind with the thing itself. I'm always judging things from within my mind. I have access to nothing but my own ideas. The ideas being just defined as whatever is before the mind. This also leads him to reject the idea of substance. So why? Well, Locke has a view of substance as the basis for properties. In the end, he says, I can't really tell you what it is. It's something I know not what. The chair, the shape of the chair, the mass of the chair, the color of the chair, the texture, all of those things are in some way in the chair. The substance is what they all inherit. It's what in some ways ties all those properties together. Just as the various properties of me are all tied together in a substance. It's not just that I am a particular height combined with a particular weight, combined with a particular shape and all of that, but rather all of those are in me. There is some substance that is me that has that height, that has that weight, that has those various qualities. But now, Berkeley says, I don't understand this idea of something I know not what that underlies the qualities of the thing and ties them all together. What can such a thing as be? We experience the qualities, we experience never the underlying substance. So I go to the doctor, and The first thing they do is have me scale, right? They measure my height, we get my height, my weight. Then I go into the room, they take my blood pressure, they do various other things, poke various parts of me, tap on me, say breathe deeply and all of this. And what are they doing? They're observing various qualities of me, various properties. But suppose I say, well, Doc, all you're doing is writing down various qualities, various descriptions true of Dan Bonavac. I want you to tell me how Dan Bonavac himself, the underlying substance, is doing. Forget the qualities. How would the doctor answer that? Right? He's perceiving, or she's perceiving, actually I rarely see a doctor, it's mostly the nurse, but whatever. Whoever it is who's talking to me is perceiving certain qualities of mine. They are not really experiencing whatever it is that is holding all those things together. And that's always the case. I experience the qualities, not the underlying substances. So here is Locke himself on substance. He is, remember, the person Berkeley's attacking here. He's trying to give us what he thinks is a common sense view of the subject. So he says, if anyone will examine himself concerning his notion of pure substance in general, he'll find he has no other idea of it at all, but only a supposition of he knows not what support of such qualities, capable of producing simple ideas in us, which qualities are commonly called accidents. So what is a substance? It's the thing that is in some way the support of the quality. It's the support of the height and the weight, the shape, the color, the various other properties of the thing. Somehow they are all properties of the thing. But now if we say, what is the thing of which they are all the properties, we don't know what to say. If anyone should be asked, what's the subject, wherein color or weight adheres, he would have nothing to say but the solid extended parts. And if he were demanded, what is it that solidity and extension adhere in, he would not be in a much better case than the Indian, before mentioned, who saying the world was supported by a great elephant, was asked what the elephant rested on. To which his answer was, a great tortoise. But being again pressed to know what gave support to the broad-backed tortoise, replied, something he knew not what. Okay, and that's the way we are. This quality depends on what? Well, maybe this and that. What do they depend on? In the end, we get back to this idea of substance, this thing that underlies all of the qualities, that holds them all together, that supports them. But what is that thing that supports them? That all of these things are the qualities of? And his answer is something, I know not what. So he's in effect admitting, I don't really have a concept of any of this. Here's the image of the world resting on the back of the great elephants, which are on the back of the great tortoise. Here's another image. A lot of people love this. I even have a t-shirt with this on. I should have worn it today, darn it. Okay, so we're going to come back to that image. But now, what will we say of your external object? Is it a material substance or no? Well, Hyles, the defender, a member of common sense, says it's a material substance with the sensible qualities inhering in it. Okay, you and I, we are such material substances, and we have various qualities inhering in us. Qualities like height and weight and shape and color and texture and, well, and then all sorts of other much more complex and interesting properties. Philo says, well, how then can a great heat exist in it, since you only cannot in a material substance? Now here's what he's worried about. What is the heat? The heat, let's say something is hot. Okay, so it has the quality of heat. But now, what does the heat inhere in? What is this underlying thing? Well, you don't want to say the heat is hot. The heat is somehow in the thing. But what is the thing that heat is in? Now, Aristotle would have said something that has to do with the natural kind. The heat, for example, is in the pot. If that's an artificial kind, really, but let's say the stripes are on the tiger. There is a sort of substance of that kind. That shape is the shape of the bronze, let's say, of the statue. And so there is some level at which we stop and say, well, we're talking about the bronze, or the person, or the tiger, or what have you. But Locke pushes it back. Well, what is it that is the tiger? What is it that is the human being? What is it that actually is of that particular kind? And then he's led to say something I know not what. But it gets him into trouble. Philonous says, the colors are really in the tulip, which I see. That's manifest. Neither can it be denied that this tulip may exist independently of your mind or mine. But any immediate objects of the senses, that is, any idea of combination of ideas, that should exist in an unthinking substance, or exterior to all minds, is in itself an evident contradiction. Nor can I imagine how this follows from what you said just now, to wit that the red and yellow were on the tulip you saw, since you don't pretend to see that unthinking substance. So now here's what's going on. He says, the color of the tulip. It's in the tulip, right? Yeah. But you say, after all, it's a secondary quality, this color, right? So it's in your mind. Yes. So it's both in your mind and in the tulip. Yes. Now, notice he says that any immediate object of the senses should exist in an unthinking substance or exterior to all minds is an evident contradiction. Why? Because he's thinking the qualities before the mind. Here's how he tries to get a contradiction. The person who's the defender of common sense, or Descartes, or Locke, want to say, in some sense, the color is in the tulip, but it's also in my mind. By the way, it seems to me color isn't the best example here. Can't the defender of secondary qualities just say, it's not in the tulip, it's only in my mind? But for the moment, let's put that aside. Whatever the quality is, let's just think, okay, the quality is supposed to be in my mind, and it's supposed to be in the object. But wait a minute, whatever's before my mind is an idea, so a quality is an idea. But now I've got an idea in the tulip. That doesn't make any sense. Either that or I've got a tulip in my mind. Well, that might make more sense, but only if that tulip is itself an idea or combination of ideas. And so I think the idea is to say this. We're supposed to have this same quality in an object as in the mind, but anything before the mind is an idea. So if the same thing is in the object, it's an idea in the object. But if that's right, it can't be a material object. So there can't actually be any material objects independent of the mind. So he says every corporeal substance, being the substratum of extension, must have in itself another extension by which it's qualified to be a substratum, and so on to infinity. In other words, all of these qualities are in something I don't know what. What's that in? Oh, something else I don't know what. Well, what's that in? Something else I don't know what. In short, he's trying to say, wait a minute, at some point you just arbitrarily stop. You say, the texture has to do with the shape of the object, ultimately, and the shape, that's in the object. Now, what's the object in? I don't know how to answer that question. If I stop and say it's not in anything, it's what everything else is in, then the claim is that's arbitrary. Whoa. The aeronautical engineering department just tries more and more wild stuff. Okay, so, anyway, yeah, the sound is in the room, okay? What's the room in? Well, maybe the room's in the building. What's the building in? At some point, we get to the point where it's like, yeah, we just stop, right, arbitrarily. But why do we stop? Philonous just says, basically, keep going, right? What's the building in? What is a human being in? What is the bronze in? And we get something I don't know what, but why do we stop asking there? What is that in? It looks like we need to keep going down and have a substratum of substrata. So he thinks that at some point, Locke is just stopping. He's saying, well, this quality depends on that quality. That, in the end, depends on the substance. That's something I don't know what. What supports that? Stop asking that question. We don't ask that about substances, okay? And Berkeley's saying, why not? Why not? Yeah, that's purely arbitrary. So he's got this image. That basically, if you take it seriously, you're going to get the world resting on the back of the great elephant, which rests on the back of the great tortoise. What supports the tortoise? Oh gosh, something I know about what supports that, etc. In the end, well, it's a variation of the story told once by Bertrand Russell. What supports the tortoise? Oh, it's another tortoise. What supports that tortoise? You'll not get me so fast, young man. It's tortoises all the way down. And there's a picture of turtles all the way down. Yeah, they're cute. Okay, so how do we avoid all of this? How do we avoid these misleading distinctions between primary and secondary qualities, or between qualities of substances and the underlying substances themselves? None of those can be supported, Berkeley is arguing, on the basis of experience. So in the end, he says what Aristotle would have called a substance, for that matter, what Descartes and Locke call substances, what you and I call objects or things, they're just collections or bundles of properties. There is nothing that is actually holding those qualities together. So what is it that is tall, that is good-looking, that is brilliant, that is standing on the stage speaking to you? Gosh, you had to say, Locke says, well, in the end, something I don't know what. Aristotle says a man. Berkeley says there's nothing at all holding those properties together. Okay, there are just ideas Those qualities are really, in the end, just things that are before your mind, so they're just ideas in your mind. They come together in various ways, they're bundled together, but there is nothing really bundling them. And if you take that seriously and say, ooh, what's the twine that bundles them? There's no answer to that really either. There is no twine bundling them. They just come sort of in a group somehow. We don't experience anything that holds them together, anything that underlies them, anything that supports them, anything they're all in, or anything like that. All we experience are the ideas themselves, the ideas of the qualities. So Hume extends this argument a bit further. Nothing holds them together except our own mental activity. I think of them together. I think of those qualities that make up me or you or the chair together. And that's what gives them a kind of unity. They don't have any intrinsic unity. They aren't tied together by anything. They aren't really in any underlying object that gives them a unity. The object is just a bundle of these qualities that happen to come together. They don't really come already bundled, Hume wants to say. We are the ones who are doing the bundling. We're the ones putting them together for our own purposes. Now, sometimes we do it in a way that's very natural, thinking about material objects, because they pop up in experience together. That's why we bundle them together. But other times we bundle them together in different ways, even though they don't pop up in experience together. And that's fine too. We're the ones doing the bundling. Now, Berkeley can conclude something quite radical from everything he's been saying. He says, in the end, what is it to be? What is it to exist? He concludes, to be is to be perceived. In the Latin, esse est percipere. Okay, to be is just to be perceived. For unthinking things, to exist is to be perceived. So they couldn't possibly exist out of the minds or thinking things that perceive them. We have access only to what's before the mind, and a thing can exist only if it's perceived. Luckily, we perceive ourselves. So the most natural case, the easy case, is the material object outside of us. It exists only to the extent that it's perceived. For it to exist is for it to be perceived. But thinking things, thought is in some way transparent. We think and we think about our thinking, and so thinking things are themselves perceived by themselves, if nothing else. So even they are not really exceptions to this claim that to be is to be perceived. Now, do things go out of existence when we aren't looking at them? There's a camera up here filming it. But suppose we all decide we're not going to look at it. Everybody look over it that way, or away from the camera in some way. Do you think it stopped existing while we weren't looking? No. It seems very strange, right? You start with Berkeley and you might think, well, gosh, okay, camera exists because I'm perceiving it. Nobody's perceiving it. Oh, it came back. I mean, children are like this, right, at a certain stage. That's why at a certain age, kids find peekaboo a fun game. You're there and you say, peekaboo. And see, well, some of you laugh. You're still at that stage. But I mean, for a while, that's really entertaining because it's like, whoa, where'd he go? Now he's back. Where'd he go? Oh, now he's back. It's like I'm poofing in and out of existence. But then the child realizes continuity is there, and I don't really go out of existence when I do this. And at that point, the game sort of loses its charm. Well, why doesn't that sort of thing happen with the world? Is the world playing peekaboo with us? No. Why? Because God's watching everything all the time. Everything is perceived by God all the time. So when I'm not watching something, it doesn't go out of existence. My cats romp around downstairs through the night. I am not ordinarily perceiving them. Sometimes I'm perceiving sounds they make, but usually not. Do they go out of existence? No. They continue existence because God is watching my cats while I sleep. Okay, now, there's something strange about this idea, and later idealists tend to alter this formula. I mean, nobody, well, I shouldn't say nobody. Maybe you find this thought very appealing, that the camera of the cats would just go out of existence if we weren't watching, but luckily God's keeping an eye on the world for us. Most idealists have said, well, that seems a little too fanciful for me. But they've altered the formula in a way that makes it, if anything, a bit more plausible, if a little bit more abstract. It's to say to be is to be perceivable. It's the kind of thing you could perceive. Could there be things that nobody ever perceives at all? Things outside our light cone, let's say, that are really things that, as a matter of practice, not only we never perceive, we never physically could perceive. Well, in theory, right, in the abstract, if we were in a different place in space and time, we could perceive them. So we might be able to say, yeah, to be is just to be perceivable. it's not a question of being perceived as such. Then we don't have to worry about things going in and out of existence. Something is perceivable, even if it's not being perceived at the moment. So that helps us to solve this problem without getting into details of God's activities while we're not looking at all of that. It also has the advantage that we can talk about things far away that no living being is seeing. We could see them if we went there, and that tells us that they're perceivable, even if nobody is actually perceiving them. So we can call those existent things. Well, Hume takes a lot of Berkeley's arguments very seriously and extends this a bit to a theory of objects. A theory of objects, that as we're going to see next week, looks a lot like the theory of objects that emerges from Advaita Vedanta and also from Buddhism. And here's a way maybe of thinking about, why do I have that there? I have a video, oh yes, thank you, good. Thank you, Brain, for reminding me. The most radical move Hume makes is to apply this to me and you. Apply this to thinking things themselves. In Berkeley, none of this applies to God, and none of this really exactly applies to the thinking thing itself. I, as a mind, you as a mind, we do have a kind of being. Now, we are perceiving ourselves, and so to be is also to be perceived for us. Nevertheless, we have a continuous existence in a way that other objects might not if God weren't watching them. You and I have a unity that other objects don't have. However, in Hume, that goes away. Hume says, actually, I'm going to apply the same argument to you and to me that I apply to everything else. Just as the object, the chair, is just a bundle of qualities, you and I are just a bundle of qualities. And I'm not just talking about you as a material object. I'm talking about you as a thinking thing. You're just a bundle of thoughts and feelings and perceptions. There is no unity to them. There is no underlying you that is thinking those things or perceiving them. Instead, it's just a matter of all those thoughts, feelings, and perceptions being there. It's as if you have no soul. But look, there is this idea that there is something underlying us, some self, some soul, some mind, some personality, psyche, something that is the source of our idea of the self. But Hume, remember, has his empiricist method, and he says, well, if there's a source of the idea of the self, I want to find out what it is. And so he starts reflecting on himself and thinking about the things that are before his mind. And he says, well, I see certain thoughts, certain perceptions, certain feelings in the mind, but I don't find myself. I don't find any source of this idea of self or soul or anything like that in experience. And he ends up concluding that all identity through change, even the identity I attribute to myself, is really being imposed on reality. It's not there in reality itself. So not only is the chair something that really has no underlying unity, I don't have any underlying unity. There's just these thoughts and feelings and perceptions. And somehow I bundle them all together and say, that's me. And I act as if they're all the thoughts and feelings and perceptions of something I know not what. But he says, I have no more idea of that than I have of the something I know not what that is supposed to support other kinds of qualities. So he advances a bundle theory of the self. He says, I may venture to affirm for the rest of mankind, they're nothing but a bundle or collection of different perceptions, which succeed each other with an inconceivable rapidity and are in a perpetual flux and movement. What he has in mind here, the immediate context is, he's thinking about these thoughts and feelings and perceptions, and he's looking for something that would serve as a marker, something that would indicate that's myself. Okay, if you think about TV screens, let's say, there is often in the corner something that tells you what you're watching, the little CW or Fox News or whatever it is, right, that's telling you this is CNN or whatever it is you're watching. Well, that little marker, he says, I'm looking for that marker in myself, that's the little DH in the corner that says, this is David Hume's perception. And I think, oh, that's the idea of the self, it's marked, DH, David Hume. And he can't find it. Now he says, maybe some other people have that. Maybe they look inside their perceptions and there's this little DB for Dan Bonamac written this online. He says, I'm not like that. And so for people like me, look, I look inside, I just see this bundle of perceptions. I don't see anything bundling together. I don't see any underlying unity. I don't see myself. So he says, for my part, when I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception or other of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I can never catch myself at any time without a perception and never can observe anything but the perception. So all I'm aware of is this perception of mine. the experience of red, or of blue, or of pain, pleasure, love, hatred, light, dark, cold, heat. That's all there is in my mind. There's nothing else tying them together. So he says, look, if I have no impression of the self, it means I have no real idea of the self. No idea that has any real content in that way anyway. I don't have any idea of self after the manner here explained for what impression could be the one from which it's derived. Now there is an assumption here, of course, that all ideas come from impressions. And I can't find an impression of the self, so I have no such idea. He says, look, if I were to have one, it would have to remain the same, even though all these thoughts, feelings, and perceptions are changing. But do I find anything constant in myself? Anything like that little Fox News or CNN or CW or ABC or whatever that is telling me, aha, this is the underlying thing? No, I find no such impression, constant and invariable, so there's no such idea. So he says, what am I really? What is the mind? It's just the perceptions. They are the successive perceptions only that constitute the mind. We don't have the most distant notion of the place where these scenes are represented or of the materials of which it's composed. So in the end, all I've got are these perceptions that constitute me, but there is no me, really, that gives them any unity. There is no underlying thing that I can point to and say, aha, those are all the thoughts and feelings and perceptions of that, because I never experienced the that. Well, what is true of me is true of every object. The identity we ascribe to the mind of man, and for that matter, it turns out to anything else, is only a fictitious one. I somehow imagine that I am a unified being, but actually, I'm not. Okay? My daughter sometimes talks like a Humean. So, I'll say, what about this? She'll say, that's a problem for future melody. Okay? What binds future melody and present melody together? Something I know not what. Bundle theory. It's not my problem, it's my future self's problem. And she acts as if, I'm nothing but this collection of these momentary selves. Well, that's Hume's idea. That's, as we'll see, the Buddhist idea of this. Yeah?
Is he saying, I'm kind of confused on, is he saying that there is no link between these perceptions of ourselves, or is he saying that we can't perceive that? Because if there is no link, isn't there a possibility that there is go apart and we couldn't exist?
Oh, all right.
Is there a possibility that it just exist?
Good question. Is it that there is no link connecting all of these? Is it that we can't perceive the link? Notice what Locke would have said about this. Locke would say, well, of course there are links between these. What is it that allows me to say I am the same person? It is continuity of consciousness. And it's not that I perceive there being one thing that is constant and invariable throughout all my experience. It's that things tie my experiences together. So I anticipate, for example, moving my hand. And then I experience the motion. And I think, I intend to move my hand. It happens, look, I'm doing it, right? And I infer that connection. And there's a continuity between my intention and then the perception I have of the actual motion. Or similarly, I remember that I had no breakfast this morning. And that's something that that ties my mental states together. There was an earlier mental state of what I was perceiving at the time, now a mental state where I'm remembering things that happened or did not happen earlier. And so there are all those kinds of links. I don't perceive those links in the sense that I see the remembering in addition to having the memory, but in some way the stream of thoughts, feelings, and perceptions in Locke is all woven together. Hume's conception is very different. He says, I don't see the weaving, really. I get that there are certain repetitive patterns. I see this and then I see that. I look over here and I see one set of impressions. I look over here, I see a different set. I look back, pretty much the same, so there's a regularity to this. But on the other hand, I'm just getting this sort of individual. Think about a movie, okay, where things are being shot on film, and they're being shot in different frames. Okay, and let's say whatever camera is capturing a certain number of frames per second. You might say all of those are things that are there and perceivable, but do we perceive what links them together? No, the movie is just this set of images perceiving very rapidly. Let's say it's 60 frames a second or 24 frames a second or whatever it is in front of the mind. And our minds are supplying the things that connect those together. All we're really seeing are still images projected very, very rapidly, but we connect them together. Now, from Locke's point of view, this is a bizarre way of thinking about the mind, but that's really Hume's idea. Hume's idea is, no, all these things are actually separate. We never perceive the connections. Are they really there? Unperceived? Is it that they're there and we don't know them? Well, maybe, but now we've got the problem of skepticism, right? Maybe we actually are incapable of knowing who we really are. And like Berkeley thinks it's simple, and it avoids the problems of skepticism if I just say there's no me to know. You might think, here's me as I perceive myself. Kant will later call this empirical consciousness. But then he will say, what's that connection to the underlying self that I really am? What he will call the transcendental unity of apperception, which ties all these thoughts, feelings, and perceptions together. And for him, it becomes an issue of how these connect. Hume, however, says, I just think as soon as you introduce that distinction, you're talking about you as you are in yourself, as opposed to the way you seem to you. Now the skeptic can say, how do you ever know what you really are? So you get into trouble. Well, gosh, this is true now of everything. I construct the idea of myself. He says if I'm to compare it to anything, it would be to a commonwealth or to a theater. Really, questions about identity in the end aren't about the world. They're about our minds, our concepts, about our use of language. And it's true of all objects, not just me. So, as Heraclitus said, I can't step in the same river twice. And he tells this wonderful story of the ship of Theseus. And here's where we'll end, really. The ship where Theseus sailed was preserved by the Athenians later. They took the old planks as they decayed, putting in new and stronger timber. Well, imagine that you've got this ship, and let's say all the material eventually has been replaced, but it's in the same form. Now, Hobbes adds this wrinkle. Imagine that someone else takes the old material and builds it back. Which one is truly the ship of Theseus? Which is the same ship as the one we start with? There's a recreation of what we think was the ship of Theseus. And I encountered this problem in real life with my old Camaro. It finally got to the point where it's falling apart. And I was sitting there waiting for it to go to the junkyard, crying, taking pictures of it, my first car ever. And this guy came by and said, what are you doing? And I explained, and he said, well, look, okay, the body is shot, but why don't you just get a new body? And I said, well, the frame is all rusted out. Well, get a new frame. But look, I mean, the engine, it's just totally crapped out. Well, get a new engine. And finally, it was like, well, replace every single part of the car. And I started thinking, it's the Camaro of Theseus. Well, anyway, is there an underlying unity? Next time we'll look at Indian philosophers who agree with Hume and Kant who doesn't.